Welcome to the Permanent Podcast. This is a mini season on diligence. Tim, why are we talking about diligence?
Diligence is a huge part of any investment firm's investment process, but it's shrouded in secrecy, and we just wanted to demystify it.
So we've open sourced our diligence process here at Permanent Equity. Let's diligence confidently.
If you want to expedite the process and you want to get through diligence quickly and you want to get to the finish line, then the best way to do that is to come in an organized fashion with everything put together and cleaned up. And when we ask all these questions, you're ready to go and you've thought through it, and here's this response.
Okay, so we're going to dive into a conversation with Taylor Hall, Tim Hanson, and then Sarah and myself were in the room. Before we dive deeper into nuance and explanations of how to navigate diligence well, we started off with just the most basic question: what is diligence?
Diligence is the process by which we have an opportunity to learn the nuances and the integral components that make a business what it is, that make it successful, that present risk, that present opportunities for improvement. It also gives us an opportunity to learn about the people, who they are, and how we can best serve them and their business moving forward. And of course, it is also an opportunity for us to identify potential risks for us as investors and as partners. But oftentimes, I think that diligence gets painted as an opportunity for someone to simply find the problems and say no.
Find the problems, say no, or find the problems and say, and we'll take another $1 million off.
Correct. I think it also depends on who's driving the process. And so because we do the diligence internally, that's not to say that we don't have other people in the background who help out on components of it, but framing it and understanding it and putting it in the context of the beginning of a 20-plus year relationship makes all the difference in the world. Because if you're looking at it from that lens, problems that might otherwise seem insurmountable, if you're looking at them in the context of a 20-plus year relationship, it's worth making the investment to get it right. It's not worth it to just say, fold your hands and say, yep, that's it. We're out of here, right? That's not what it's about.
We even have the latitude to be a little bit wrong, right? Because
absolutely.
We can make it up. Like if you make a mistake and you have to fix it in 3 years, it's a lot different from making a mistake that you have 25 years to figure out. I mean, there's questions in here about why deals we've had have fallen apart in diligence, and most of them, I went back and looked, most of them have to do with what was presented pre-diligence and what we learned in diligence were basically irreconcilable. So one example was a business that advertised $4 million of cash flow and actually consumed $17,000 of cash in the same year. Another one lost a large client in the middle of the process.
Right.
Another one, quote unquote, puked cash flow.
What does that mean?
that was how the business was described to us. This is a business that, quote unquote, pukes cash.
Right.
And during the 6 months we were working on it, did not generate a single dollar of cash.
No. It was actually not so much of the puking cash. It consumed a lot of it. It was good at that.
Yeah.
Just wasn't so good.
It didn't come out.
Forking it back up. Yeah.
And then the other one was, and this one was on me because I missed a footnote in the sim, a very tiny footnote in the sim, which is when we actually requested the raw financials and diligence, the growth rates did not match the growth rates that were in the sim. And it was because in the sim, the time period went from May 15th to May 15th of the next year instead of month end to month end. And something very important happened on May 14th that made the year over year growth rate look very impressive. And when I went back, I was like, what? Taylor's like, these numbers don't match yours at all. And then I'm like, huh, there's a little letter A there.
Yeah.
Oh, come on.
That one, we could have a whole conversation. Maybe this is the next podcast about choose your advisors wisely.
And they got mad at us about that.
I actually think everything that Tim just said it points to one element of diligence or any deal process where if I could give some advice, there will never be a better time to disclose something than right now. Meaning, the longer you wait, it will come out. There's very few cases where we're not going to figure it out eventually. And the problem is there are maybe any number of reasons why a seller may, I don't want to say this, present it in a certain light, or may just choose not to disclose information.
And it may not be the seller, right? It may be the counsel they're
Could be, right? And there may absolutely be valid reasons for doing that. I don't know what they are. All I know is this. If we find out later in the process, or any buyer, not just us, anybody finds out later in the process, and it doesn't come directly from the horse's mouth, you're going to assume bad intentions. You're going to assume that the problem is probably bigger than it might actually be. And it's a hard bell to unring.
Especially if we're in the process of trying to build trust for a 27-year relationship.
Absolutely. Right. I think, look, and it makes sense to me. A seller has oftentimes, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They've been told so many different things from their advisors about how to present themselves, about to make sure they're always putting the right foot forward. They're looking at potentially receiving a life-changing amount of money. And I'm sure that they're often concerned that, hey, one wrong thing and this all goes away, this all goes down the drain, I've lost the opportunity, etc. And therefore, they are understandably or naturally reserved in what they may or may not say and share with everyone, because they think that the answer is going to be the other party's just going to slam the phone and walk away. But the reality is, I think, as we pointed to earlier, we want to know the information so that we can help, and so that we are trying to put the deal together in a way that makes sense, and to deal with the issues now and not 2 weeks before the closing, after we've already spent a bunch of time, money, and energy on both sides of the table.
I think the thing to know about us, right? This is true of every investment firm, but it's particularly true about us. Like, we know we're in the business of taking risk, right? I mean, and the diligence process exists to help us understand the risks we're taking, and we just want to be able to confidently take them.
Right.
We know that no transaction, like, we're not buying treasuries. These are not risk-free investments, right? We just want to know what risk we're taking, and that's the whole point. And we want to take risks. We have huge incentives to do it.
And I also think that we're not shy about telling you what the risk is and helping to analyze it, and doing so right away. We want this to work. Nobody wants it to work more than us. Are there things that come out in diligence where we say, oh, this is going to be a problem? I suppose, yeah. I mean, but that's not a unique to us thing. Like, if you've got something that comes up to us and we say this is going to be an issue and we can't move forward, one, it's extraordinarily rare. Extraordinarily rare.
Can you think of an example that we've had?
I would say the closest example that we had was a company that we worked with, and the product was terrific and the use of it was great. We loved the end market. We thought it was super interesting. The people were great, but it consisted of two components, really, a software piece and a hardware piece. And that hardware piece had been developed over time in conjunction with an international supplier. And the risk that came out of that was, one, they hadn't documented the relationship in any way. So there was a legitimate question as to who owned the intellectual property that made up what was ultimately without this component, the product doesn't work, right? So that was part one. And part two was there was an incredible amount of reliance on that particular supplier, to the point where when asked if they disappeared tomorrow, how quickly would it take us to get started up with the next supplier? You know, we were looking at 18 months, only to then go back and say, it's probably more like 24 to 36 months, right? So we looked at that and we said, that's a problem, right? But even in that instance, the response wasn't, hey, we're pulling out of the deal, this doesn't work. The response was, we sent a very long, detailed memo explaining the issue.
You're good at those.
The detailed memos? Yeah. It's my jam. Nothing like a good memo. I sit down by the fire at night. Yeah, saying, here's the issue as we see it. And by the way, here's the 5 things that we would do to fix it. And here are the 3 people you can call that we want to get involved to help us fix this for you and to work with you in the process. And ultimately, it collapsed, not because we wanted it to or because we were trying to pull away. They didn't feel like those steps were necessary, or they didn't want to put in the additional effort to take all those steps. And at that point, we felt like it's not an investment we can make. We're not interested in hiding things away to pop out later for some sort of bargaining chip. That doesn't help anyone or anything. I'd rather address the issue right now, and we'll be very candid in how we look at it. You may not like the answer. It may not always be what you want to hear, but I can assure you that it comes from a place of sincerity and of honesty, and one of which we're trying to forge a solution and a path forward.
That posture that you just described, why do I have a caricature that's the exact opposite when it comes to private equity, diligence?
You know, We talk about this a lot internally. These are all people we're going to have to work with, right? So tell me how it helps us short, medium, long term to play some game in which we are potentially damaging them or trying to take advantage of a situation when these are people we're A, have to work with, B, often they're co-investing alongside of us. There's really no upside there. That I wouldn't want to build a relationship on that.
Now, if you contrast it with like when you get a home inspection when you're buying a house, right? The people you're buying the house from, they're not going to live with you post transaction.
Ideally.
So everything that comes up in that home inspection report is a bargaining chip, right? When you buy a house and you get the inspection report back and it like needs a new roof, you're like, okay, we're going to go ask for $12,000 off or whatever it is, right? And as the seller, you're like, damn it, they found it. They found the toilet that was leaking and now they're going to ask me for a new one, right? The mindset on business side, like it's totally different for the reasons Taylor just said.
Actually, frankly, that mindset informs all kinds of things. The first time actually that I worked with permanent equity in my capacity as outside counsel, and I started thinking about how the structure of the fund and the building of long-term partnerships influences every aspect of a transaction. And it's not just the way that you approach the purchase agreement. It's the way you approach diligence. It's the way you approach long-term incentive compensation. It's the way you approach employment agreements. It's the way you approach your operating agreements with them. It impacts all of it because you're optimizing for different things. You're not optimizing for short-term returns on a one-time bite at the apple. You're optimizing for long-term stability, durability, growth, and partnership. And necessarily, you have to think about a deal differently. Your perception of how deals work and how the diligence process works is one that is prevalent. I think most people think about private equity and that's the way they think about it. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think our peers in the industry are trying to do the right thing as well. And they don't have ulterior motives all the time. But I think it comes down to the same point. They're just optimizing for different things. And those have natural consequences and outcomes. And one of which is you don't have the luxury of worrying about relationship always, partnership, because those individuals are optimizing however they can for short-term gains and returns.
You've talked about diligence being trust building, relationship building. What are the things then that a seller can do that will build trust in the buyer? And then also, what are some things you've seen as a buyer that have built trust up for the seller throughout that process?
So I say this not even just in the context of permanent equity. I would say it to any seller. And this is probably going to date me a little bit, but if anyone recalls the old head
so does your two spaces after a period.
Aside from the two spaces.
Double space after a period, guy?
Come on, dude.
You're insane.
You know, I'm sorry.
Psychopath.
If I was
a psychopath.
If I was,
next thing you're going to tell me is you like single stuffed Oreos.
You know what?
We're both right on that.
Oh my gosh.
What, on the
Crazy
Oreos
people.
or the double spaced?
No, the double space is crazy talk.
Oh, come on.
This is actually an intervention. This is all a ruse.
This entire 30 minutes has been to get here now.
I can't
Sir,
help.
you have a
I'm the
problem.
product of an old school parochial education.
Typewriters.
Typewriters.
That's what it was. Come on. They even made you take, like, when you were writing and you had to have 2 eraser spaces after your period. That's just, I don't know. Now it's a habit. I can't break it. I'm sorry. You guys are going to have to learn to adapt to me.
I don't let him edit by.
I don't want to derail us here, but I'm genuinely curious. On a phone, then, do you triple space to get that second space?
Yes.
So after every sentence, you now triple space?
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to get it out.
In order to get the period plus the extra
Correct.
space?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Continue, crazy person, with your thoughts and advice.
Not even.
You've lost all credibility. But
So what I was saying was, for this little digression, if you recall the old Head and Shoulders commercials, and the tagline was, "You never get a second chance to make a first impression." If I could say to sellers out there, there is no better time spent, resources spent, than taking the 6 months, 3 months, whatever it is, prior to going to market, prior to selling your business, to get things cleaned up, to get it in order. Because I can tell you that sellers generally have some variation of one of the following 3 concerns, or usually all of them together. How much do I get? When do I get it? And do I get to keep it? Right? I mean, that's a crude way of looking at it, but right, those are the concerns. If you want to expedite the process and you want to get through diligence quickly, and you want to get to the finish line, then the best way to do that is to come in an organized fashion with everything put together and cleaned up. And when we ask all these questions, you're ready to go and you've thought through it, and here's his response.
What does cleaned up mean to you?
I think cleaned up to me means, do we have valid, current copies of all of our material contracts? Have we kept minutes and organizational history for our business so that we understand that a third party can look at it and understand how the business has evolved over time? Is the equity table up to date? Is there documentation supporting all of that? Are there written agreements with your material vendors and suppliers? And if not, is there an explanation for why and a way to document the operating history between you? This is how we've operated historically, and here's why. Is all of your intellectual property locked up in the sense that you have either registered it or updated your registrations where necessary? Do you have an employee handbook that is up to speed, or any kind of employee handbook?
If you don't, should you go make one, or should you just...
I think it's worth thinking about.
Okay. You would argue that they don't have one, but they are operating as though they do, right? There are norms and procedures, and so you might as well document it.
At least tell us, at least put down what you're actually doing.
Like what people's expectations are when they show up at work.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
Your internal operating
You don't need to
policies.
change it. You don't need to gussy it up and do something that's not true.
Just write down what you're doing.
Right.
Just so here it is. This is what we do.
Is that so you can understand the culture of the team you're buying, or is it to just document like literally what do they do all day?
That's a big question.
Okay.
Well, like vacation policy, for example.
Right.
Isn't it like, oh, it's unlimited? But was that written down anywhere? That's just an understanding.
Right. I think there's that. There's a really functional, like, so we understand, but it also is, we always want to make sure that employees and the people who are really driving the business are the ones who are satisfied, who are happy. I would say, if you're getting ready and you're thinking about selling your business, thinking about taking to market, there is no more valuable use of your time than getting organized and prepared for that. You can find sample due diligence questions. I would
Maybe in this package.
And I would highly encourage you to spend some time with yourself and your management team going through that and asking yourselves, hey, do we know where all this is? Or how would we respond to this question? And preparing yourself for that, because whether it's permanent equity or any other buyer out there in the world, they're going to ask some variation of these questions. And I think coming to the table and being prepared to respond thoroughly and effectively helps in so many ways, not the least of which is it begins the trust building process.
Relationship, yeah.
Yeah. It tells me, hey, these guys are prepared, they're ready to go, they've thought through these issues, and they're invested. They've taken the time to answer these questions. They're as invested in the building of this partnership as we are. Now, with that said, sometimes the best response that we can get, the best response that goes a long way into building trust is one that is very self-aware and is, I don't know the answer to that. Or we don't have that. I know that we should, but we don't have it. Because if someone's willing to say that, then they recognize that they're not perfect and that they trust us enough to know that they're going to say that and we're going to work with them, and it's not going to be just oh, see you later, or hey, now we're changing the deal terms, right? It tells me that they have that self-awareness and they're willing to be open about where their flaws are. We go into every deal not expecting the business to be perfect. We know there are flaws. And the more forthright you can be about them, the more honest and open, the better that we can start to address it. And we can start to work together to find a solution.
And it doesn't need to be solved immediately, right? I mean, we have things on our punch list that are like 5-year things. Just, hey, we got to get this done at some point. We'll work towards it, but at least we know it's out there.
Here's a great one, right? You'll say, all right, let me have a list of your top 20 customers for the last 3 years. Great. And then I might also ask the question later and that says, hey, what's all your current active customer contracts of a material nature? And the response might be, oh, we don't have any of those. And then I see this list of these customers, and then I see we don't have any of those. And then I have to go back and say, well, this isn't matching up because you just told me you've got these 20 customers, 10 of which I know are huge companies and they don't do things on handshakes. And then you're telling me you don't have those. So help me square the circle here because something isn't adding up. And maybe the answer is, well, we just do everything on a purchase order and then we have individual terms and conditions that apply to each. And so it really depends on the circumstances of each individual transaction. That answer is much more effective and tells me that you've thought through it. You're trying to help us understand the business, and it actually then cuts off any future additional follow-ups. So being thoughtful, being thorough, and looking at it from the context of us trying to understand your business and not trying to find a flaw, right? And maybe, the question really is, we should start every diligence process with, tell me everything you know about your business and how you operate on a day-to-day. That's basically what we're asking. We're just asking it individual questions that are targeted. But it's not a
fun-sized questions.
They're fun-sized questions, much like me, fun-sized. So I think just because you don't have a good answer doesn't make it a bad answer. I think it's also fair to say there are instances when there may not be a solution. That's just reality. And I don't want to paint a picture that's completely false. Organizationally, what we are committed to doing is to work through a plan to see if we can get through whatever issues might arise during the course of diligence. We actually just recently closed on a transaction that throughout the course of diligence, there were at least 4 material issues that came to the forefront. Throughout that process of sort of identifying those issues, we were very clear in how we communicated them to the seller. Since I enjoyed it so much, I presented another lengthy memo to them, identifying those 4 issues very clearly.
Bullets. Sub-bullets.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Would you say your love language is long memos? Long walks on the beach for some. Taylor would like a long memo.
I would say long memos with the use of Romanettes as indications of my love to you. But the process in preparing that memo and going through it and explaining it to the company, we were very forefront. We were very honest about these are 4 issues, all of which need to be addressed. Here's how we would think about going about it. If it was up to us, this is how we would solve these issues.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you're likely to get back from us, from Taylor, which is this is what we see. This is why we believe it's problematic. This is what we might do to fix it. What is your response? And then oftentimes we will get back a response that says, oh, we will run down trying to fix it. Or they'll say, oh, it's actually not problematic because did you think of this? And sometimes we get like, oh, yeah, we didn't actually think of that. Okay.
Right.
But, we say this in all facets of diligence, which is, and we invite people to call us out on it, right? Which is we're going to show our work. Like if you want to see what we're doing and why we're at, like we will show you every bit of work. And all we ask is that you do the same. So if we say, hey, the answer is 4, we're going to show you we found 2, 2 + 2 is 4. And it's like, no, it's 6. It's like, well, how'd you get, where's your other 2? 6. If you don't show your work, then we start trying to reverse engineer it. It doesn't make any sense. That's where friction comes up because if you don't know what assumptions people are working from, you're just being asked to take something on blind faith, which again, is not what we want to do during diligence because we're trying to confidently take risk and you can't do that on blind faith.
I actually think oftentimes that in the diligence process, what might seem to be overwhelming is actually a process in trying to be very clear. And oftentimes we're dealing with people who have not gone through this process before. So I think part of the exercise in restating things or asking them differently are making sure that I'm meeting them where they are and trying to be as inclusive as possible so that we're not 3 months down the road, something pops up and then it becomes a problem. And it's not even necessarily a bad thing. It may just be a structural element of the business that we didn't understand fully. Now we're 3 months down the road. The recipe, the cake, whatever metaphor you want to use, is 3/4 of the way baked. But now I got to take it out and start all over again, in part because I just didn't include this other element. So it's really just an exercise in trying to make sure we're being as inclusive as possible. Because oftentimes, it's also something as simple as your word for something and my word for something may be completely different.
Sure.
One of the happens all the time, and only on someone like me would this be grating. But someone refers to stock for everything: membership interest, partnership interest, units, whatever. They just say stock. It's all stock.
It's not stock.
And in my mind, I'm like, do you realize what you've done? The implications of calling this stock? How dare you? It's offensive. But the reality is that, I have no idea, right? So if I just say stock, maybe they're like, well, I don't have stock. So it's fine.
Do you have a membership interest? No.
No.
Do you have options?
Exactly. Is it phantom equity? Is it some other type of, there's so many different ways of saying the same thing. So believe it or not, it's not trying to be pedantic or annoying in the approach. By the time we've gotten to the point where we're putting in the work and the time and the effort to go through diligence, we want this to succeed. I don't want there to be a got you. Mm-hmm. What I want there to be is to make sure that all of the issues come out so that we can work collaboratively to find solutions to get across the finish line. And by solutions, I don't necessarily mean something unique or out of the blue. What I mean is it may turn out that you have an interesting component to your business that ultimately we can use it to generate a tax savings for the seller and how we structure the transaction. But if I don't know that information, I can't do it. And it's that way, whether it's a tax issue, thinking about how we operate the business moving forward, how we contract with our partners. There's all kinds of different elements. And really, I want to understand it. We want to understand it so that we can be better partners, and not because it's a got you. Trust me, if we've gotten to that point and we're putting in the time, the effort, the energy, we've said we like this business. We want to be partners with them. We want this to work. Nobody wants it to work more than us.
One framework to think about any long process and whether it's successful or not, right, is to say, hey, if at the end of this, we're all excited to move forward, what happened? And if at the end of this, we're not, what happened, right? That's like the old classic pre-mortem. At the end of diligence, we want to have high trust with each other and be in a position to be excited about running the business and confidently taking risks by calling in capital from our outside investors. If diligence has not gone well, something has happened that has caused us to not trust each other, and we are not excited about taking a risk on the business, right? In the latter, what happened probably was that some information got obfuscated, and that information that was obfuscated probably tied to some disconnect between what we were told initially about the business and what the actual reality of the business turned out to be. And again, that doesn't mean the deal fell apart or even got renegotiated, but at least we're off to a rocky start, right? In the former example, the same things may be true, right? The presentation and reality may not have matched up, but at least likely someone was forthright about it, and we learned enough to be excited to move forward.
We try to be very humble in our approach, and I don't think you'll find any person on the permanent equity
The most
team,
humble.
We're the most humble.
The humblest. I don't think you'll find anyone on our team who will walk in to any business that we're looking at and presume that they know or understand how to operate the business better. And what I would say is that this is an opportunity for sellers to help close the gap for us a little bit. We recognize that they know more and appreciate and understand the nuances of their business more than we can ever hope to. But help us start to close that gap a little bit. And why do we want to close the gap? We want to close the gap so we're better partners, so we can be more efficient and help you operate in the future. I'd love to be in a position so that
And also so don't lose a shit ton of money.
Well, there's that.
Important part of it.
I want to be in a position so that 6 months after the closing, the operator, the CEO can call me on the phone with an issue, and I can dive in immediately and help out without having to spend 30 minutes getting me up to speed on why this even matters. Because I kind of understand the business and why it matters. Helps me be a better partner in the future. It helps our financial team be better partners in the future. It helps our operations team be better partners in the future, right? So closing the gap matters because we want to understand your business and be better partners. Closing the gap matters because we can better structure a transaction to achieve everyone's goals, whether it is from a tax perspective, whether it's from a continuing ownership, rolling over equity perspective, and whether it's also from positioning the future company to be isolated potentially from potential historic liabilities. All those things matter. So it's really the opportunity for a seller to help close the gap and teach us about their business so that we can be better partners, so that we better understand the business, and of course, so that we don't lose a shit ton of money.
In our next conversation in this little mini diligence podcast, Emily and Tim are going to walk through the process of closing the deal, from the first conversation that you initially have to going through diligence and site visits and all the stuff in between to closing the deal. You can go to permanentequity.com/diligence, and you can find this entire project built out over a series of a few pages. permanentequity.com/diligence. We also have a PDF download. Once again, that's permanentequity.com/diligence.